Welcome back to the 249th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including next-gen Marxism. There's an interesting book coming out. They have some interesting details in this article. We'll go through it. How this next election cycle, this next part of the election season is going to be very, very hard for Donald Trump with all the prosecutions. And someone is trying to repeal the 16th Amendment. Thank the Lord. And of course, we went today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, for those of you who were alive during the Red Scare, are you seeing a resurgence in the commie or anti-Marxist language? Are you seeing it be more permissible to speak about these things ever since the Soviet Union has fallen? For those of you who didn't live through the Red Scare, do you see these Marxist ideas coming back up? I mean, have you accepted some? Are you a Marxist yourself? I'm very interested because I feel as though I hear a lot about it, but also I'm pretty sure it's a bubble. Because you go out and talk to people, and most people are like, hey, I am full-on capitalist, Marx, wow, crazy person. Even if they haven't read his stuff, they just instantly respond, no, no, no. So I feel like it's a bit of a bubble, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an ascendant group that has these beliefs, and that doesn't mean that it's not relevant in today's politics whatsoever, because even a small group can have a big impact. So let's talk about that small group. This first article comes from the Daily Signal, and the headline reads, Exclusive, Next-Gen Marxism. What is this cancer taking over American institutions? And that's a pretty bold proclamation. I'll be honest, straight off the bat. Daily Signal works or is technically funded by the Heritage Foundation, and this book is being put out by people at the Heritage Foundation, or at least that have worked closely with them in the past. So obviously they're kind of doing their own promotion. They obviously are pushing their own message. The Heritage Institution doesn't like Marxism, very conservative think tank. So take it all with I would say with a grain of salt. That doesn't mean what they're saying is wrong. Just because the Agricultural Department or the EPA puts out a study about agriculture or the environment, that doesn't mean just because they have an interest in it, it is inherently wrong. Or just because the EPA is going to lean towards more protective policy doesn't mean that they're inherently wrong. They could be speaking some facts about some things. They could be 100% right. So you at least have to hear out the argument. So this idea, when the Roosevelt Institute put something out, or when other institutes like Cato put things out, I don't always agree with all of them, and I know they're biased going in, so you got to be aware, but you still got to hear these sort of arguments out. So let's read the first paragraph here. Quote, a new Marxist ideology is gripping America's institutions, but this isn't the Soviet Marxism of the 1960s. This is a next-gen Marxism, and it's infiltrating every part of American life. First, on the Daily Signal, what has happened to America? How did it become a land where teachers tell students they may have been born in the wrong body, and where keeping your job could depend on affirming the lie that our society is systematically racist? These are just two examples of the many in which the new Marxist ideology is gripping our nation's institutions. So what they're getting at here is these pillars that they're pointing out, they say are semi-fundamental to some of the new Marxist claims. And what is interesting here, and I think is more of a meta-analysis, which you actually can draw whether or not you agree that these certain practices, these certain columns are being co-opted or used in the Marxist movement, you can definitely analyze that the cancel culture that has been prominent on both sides, and then again, social ostracization is not something that is exclusively Marxist, but the idea that it is not permissible to even speak certain things, we definitely saw that permitted within Marxist nations. We saw that in the Soviet Union, where certain realities were not meant to be talked about, or even if they're not realities, certain opinions are just not meant to be had, and if you have them, you are thrown out from the group. Then again, like I said, this is not something that is solely Marxist. This is actually kind of human nature. If you are going out saying, actually, no, we need to protect all the buffalo, and your village's entire food come from buffalo, they're probably going to say, no, you're crazy, and we don't want you here advocating and telling the kids that we can't kill the buffalo because otherwise how are we going to live? So this is a practice that's long been here in human nature, but the idea and the thing that I want to point out is that Marxism uses this, weaponizes this, and has given us plenty of examples of when they have to really force. They're really okay with coercion and using force in order to get what they want done. So therefore, in this case that they're pointing out, that a teacher could be fired for not necessarily following the line, or the curriculum has to follow a very specific line and the teacher has to fall in with that. But once again, I could be stretching a little bit, but that's probably one thing that you could point out in between here. And you could say, okay, maybe there is a little bit of a through line, and maybe there's a genuine underpinning here that the author is pointing out of this article and also the authors of this book. I'm not going to read the description of the authors because while I think it's absolutely fascinating and honorable, and I'd love to hear what your background is, I'm pretty sure you guys don't quite care. Quote, in this deeply researched yet immensely readable book, the authors show the roots of Marxism and how the philosophy and the movement have evolved over time, and the imminent threat that the next-gen Marxism poses to America today, and how we can save our institutions from the growing number of cultural Marxists all around us. So, I'm going to skip past the overall book view, and we're going to skip to the next line, which I think is even more important because it's starting to describe what next-gen Marxism actually entails, what groups it entails. Because, okay, so you look at original Marxism. It was based a lot in progressive movements. It was based in early union movements. So the socioeconomic group that's a little bit lower, the working class. So you can see where the roots are. Now we're going to analyze the new roots. Quote, the use of race, sex, sexual orientation, climate, social justice, gender, animal rights, the degradation of beauty and the sublime, the consequent elevation, so we've moved on from the categories, and now we're describing what this new Marxism is, the elevation of ugliness, chaos, and disorder, the dissemination of the family, and the abandonment of God. These and many other diverse struggles are in front in a larger war. They're all separate fronts is what they're getting at here. And I want to break down some of these because what I found really interesting was the degradation of beauty and the sublime. This one is a little tricky to me because if they're saying that we can't collectively acknowledge something that's beautiful because there's a subjective worldview that has become ever more prominent, not just on the left, but within our society overall, and that means that there is no thing that is objectively beautiful, or there are less things that fall into that category. Maybe, but I don't know. Let's be clear, a lot of the people that they're describing here who, not everybody, but a lot of people who care about these issues are going to be extremely open-minded. They're going to be extremely on the creative scale, and they're going to create beautiful works of art. So then again, some are going to create really subjectivist stuff. Some of them are going to create things that objectively are not beautiful. They just look like they're a hodgepodge of things. Sure, but I wonder if they're playing at that subjectivity. It's not necessarily clear in what they're saying, and I would love for a further breakdown. I may grab this book and read into it. It will be on the back end of the list, though, because there are a whole bunch of other ones that I have on the list. The dissemination of the family, whether or not you like it, there's definitely been a push within the culture that the traditional family, the family that was the backbone of society, that is talked about in religious circles, that is talked about in just about every culture and has allowed us to repopulate, that is no longer the center. It doesn't necessarily have to be man, woman, child. It can now be man, man, child, woman, woman, child. So I think they're also chalking this up, saying the original role, the original way that the family was conceived, we don't have to necessarily follow that anymore. So it's a reinvention of the family, which is a lot of what Marxist societies do. They use previous institutions and reconstitute them in their image very often, or they just outright overthrow them and still use some cultural norms, or change the ideas or change the meaning of certain things. And let's be clear, the meaning of certain things is a little bit tricky. What I mean by that is they'll change the definitions of core things. So look at Soviet Russia. Instead of calling it World War II, I believe it was the war of, no, sorry, I'm thinking of the Civil War, which is the War of Northern Aggression. But I believe it's either the war of like German aggression or fascist aggression, but they reframe things and they kind of alter the perspective through which you can view that thing, and you kind of subtly change what it is. And that's what they're doing with family. No, it's still a family if it's a mom, and child. And sure, if you want to go off the definition that it's a collective of people that have a child, or a collective of people that adopt children, or have some sort of structure like that, sure, but it's kind of altering the original definition, which happened to be biological or, blood ties, and sometimes it's not always possible to have a biological child in that group, and that's more of a modern definition. A more traditional definition of family is going to be mama, dada, baby. Okay, so you can see the redefinition, the altering, the slow change of things. I think that's one of the points that they are getting at. So how did we get to the point where all of these groups are coming together? Eric Mann calls this a little division of labor that communists create as they carry out their goal of overthrowing the United States. Mann recalled that he once asked a gay rights leader, "How did you come up with the idea of Gay Liberation Fund?" He says, "Do you think that was just what we called that? Because we believed in the National Liberation Fund out of Vietnam. We weren't just wanting gay marriage. We wanted to overthrow the government as part of being queer." So it's interesting what they're getting at here is that they're kind of implying that people who would like communists run in these circles, which I don't think is fair. And what I said implying, there are certain sects, there are certain groups within any different demographic that will believe one thing or another. But I think what they're trying to imply here is that these groups can be co-opted because they are seen as a minority, they're seen as outcast, and therefore you have this coalition of the ascendant. And this is something where they don't explicitly say it here, but this is something where I actually agree. And we've had some breakdown of the different political views and the electoral views on how people can win. And the coalition of the ascendant, the groups that are minorities, that are normally less represented within the United States, and trying to break them off from the traditional groups, or like even looking at it in a race-based way, trying to break off different chunks of the white vote by trying to break them up into groups like gay people, trans people, people who believe in the environmentalist movement. You start breaking down into categories, and you find these minorities or these clump of minorities, and then you create the coalition of the ascendant until they're either the majority, or as a group they have enough power to wield their message and do as they would want with the government. And I don't mean that in a negative way, just in order to get their people into office. Now, the authors would probably take this to the next level, saying that they would use that power to dismantle said power, but that's where you're going to have to go read the book. This article is an interesting read. It really opens up some interesting ideas, and I think that all the answers I'm asking for could probably be at least talked about a little bit in the book, and any questions that you're getting, like, Alex, wait, hold on, what are you getting at here? If you don't understand some of the basic premises, go read this book. If you do understand some of the premises and you think I'm crazy, comment down below. Love to hear what everybody has to say. So let's jump to our next article. This one is a little bit shorter, but I want to analyze the overall idea here because I think it's true, but I don't think it will go the way that certain people would actually want it to, believe it's going to. So let's jump to it. It comes from Raw Story. And this one is going to be a massive problem. Republicans in panic over Trump's rally dilemma. And yeah, the idea here, and whether or not you agree, is that Donald Trump's rallies, the reason that Republicans would freak out, and also this is a story, is Donald Trump's rallies are special. There's something about them. There's something about the air. There's something about the way he presents it. There's something about the energy in the room. He kind of feeds off of it. He gets happy, giddy, whatever it wants to be. Some people would compare it to like fascist rallies back in the day with Mussolini in Italy. Some people would just say that he's a great speaker when he's in public. I don't care what your analysis is. I don't care why you think that they're good. And if you think they're bad, but they're good at reaching a goal that is bad, or if you just think they're bad, then I'd love to hear if you just think they're bad. But I think everybody can acknowledge that they're at least effective, and whether or not you think they're good is based on whether you think they're effective for a good thing or a bad thing, not whether or not the actual way of communication and the way of speaking to his supporters and going to these rallies has been effective for him to get a message out, whether or not you like said message. So we know that he's been going through lots of trials. He's been pent up in these courtrooms. He's not necessarily liking what's coming his way from some of these judges. And at the end of the day, that means less time to be at the rallies. Well, now he's going to be pent up in New York again. He's able to kind of go out after some of these trials and speak like it, not necessarily like it's a rally, but close enough where he can stand there on the steps and say, and talk directly to his people, into the camera, or the people that gather outside. This is an evil prosecution. They're coming after me. They're coming after me because they're coming after you. I know it's a terrible impression. I don't want to put on the real impression because that's not necessarily the point here. The point is, no matter how much he does that outside the court, that's not enough. That is not the same as his rallies. That is not going to get the same passion out of people. They can't just stand in the streets of New York and chant and love everything he's saying. He can't just set up a microphone there. It would probably be like a public disturbance. So he's not going to be able to be on the ground. He's not going to be able to be in the Californias, the Arizonas, the Wisconsins, the Iowas. He's not going to be able to give those rallies that his people love, and that also, they actually point out here within the article, they kind of give him energy. But, speaking of the article, I'm going off on a rant. Let's go through what Raw Story has to say. Quote, Donald Trump's legal woes are causing no small amount of concern among Republicans as the 2024 presidential election campaign enters a critical phase. And not because the head of the GOP ticket may soon be a convicted felon. Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people that are already supporting him are saying it wouldn't change anything. For some people who are in the middle, they're like, would it necessarily change the situation? Yes. And there are other ones who say, I don't know. So we'll see how everything goes. We also have what? Let me do some quick math here. We still have 8 months. 8 months until the election. A little bit like 7. We're getting a little bit closer now because we're in the 4th month. Yeah, so we're about 7-ish, 6-ish months out from the election. So at the end of the day, a lot of things can happen. Trump can get convicted. Biden could completely, royally screw something up, especially with everything going on in foreign policy and how the Israel situation's going, how Ukraine's going. There's been a few things that the conservatives would point out as flubs, and maybe that changes the overall situation. Sure. But the current math right now is that if he is a convicted felon, it will have some effect, but we don't know how much effect. But one thing that we know will have an effect is him not being able to be out there spreading his message and only having one side of his story told. And his rallies are a great way to get out there and tell his side of the story. They're also a great way to get earned media coverage. But if it's only prosecution, versus he said something at this rally with thousands of people around him, those are two distinctly different visuals, two distinctly different messages that are being sent out to the normie viewer who's just now starting to tune in because we're getting close to the election. Quote, with the former president about to be tied up with attending court proceedings in Manhattan in his hush money trial that could last for weeks, his inability to traverse the country and hold his rallies will be severely curtailed. And those rallies, with the attendant media coverage, are a key to his fundraising. That's another big point, which is if they don't see him out there on the trail, if they don't see him coming to their area, then a lot of people aren't going to give small dollar. Some big donors are going to say, hey, you haven't actually come out to my area. You're not listening to my concerns. Sure, you may invite me to some of these big galas, but I can't make it. I want to see you out here on the stump. I want you to bring me up on stage. That's what happens with a lot of donors or a lot of people who may have like political PAC money that they would be willing to throw behind. They're like, bring me out on stage. I can talk about this, that, or the other. So there's lots of different factors that go into this 100%. So what is going to be his solution? I don't necessarily know. I think that he's going to just sit on the stairs and he's going to say, they're prosecuting me, give me money. And he's kind of burned out his donors. There's a little bit of rumblings that the Republican base has been hit so many times with money requests from the RNC, from local candidates, from Donald Trump. Apparently the rolls are getting a little bit worn out. So I don't know if small dollar is going to work anymore. Then again, if they see him being prosecuted, that may be something that really, really emboldens people. But lots of analysts are still not liking this situation, even with all of that factored in. Quote, according to a report from the Daily Beast, Jake LaHut, excuse me, sir. The lack of rallies, as well as their massive expense when they do occur, is becoming a growing concern. That's another thing. At the end of the day, most of the money is going to legal bills now. Most of that money that he does earn goes to legal bills, and they're not going to go to the rallies. So the ones he may have may not be as big. It may not be worth going on the huge private jet to go out there when he knows that it's going to be hard to get small dollar donors because he's already worn them out, and that the rally is only 25% more effective, and it's going to cost a whole bunch more money to put it on. The math there, maybe, I don't know. We may just not do one. You know what? We're going to stay here. I'll put something out on Truth Social. I'll say the crooked media, the crooked Democrats, and then, we'll get about the same amount of return without being at the rallies. And the thing is, his rallies have always been, once again, bad Trump impression, fully aware. But the point being, he's probably going to look at the cost-benefit analysis and say, I don't know. I'm probably not going to go out. And I'm sure that Trump is keenly aware that his rallies, even while he was president, while he was running the first time, that's where a lot of his big jokey moments come from. His iconic moments were really on the debate stage, but some of those jokey moments, some of the more humanizing moments, the more self-deprecating humor came from when he was on the trail. People felt like they could go talk to him. They felt like it was a big family reunion sometimes when everybody's wearing the MAGA hats. Everybody's loving it. There are vendors there trying to sell things. So it's a big selling point. And if you can't get out there and do it, it's a genuine concern. Now, is the story being overblown because they want to run with it and because I'm trying to detail everything that could be a problem? Sure. It may sound like, it's the worst thing. It may not be the worst thing. He may be able to get through it, especially with the new donation split with the RNC. If people opt into it, they can give money to help his legal fund, so then he can actually reserve some money for the campaign trail. Maybe that will be a big alleviator, but I don't know. And I think his rallies are extremely potent at, one, getting, like I said earlier, the media coverage. I mean, the whole bloodbath thing that ran for basically 3 days, that's earned media coverage. Everybody on MSNBC, CNN, even Fox News is covering it. That came from a rally. So those sort of things, they really do benefit him. And what I mean by that is the people who don't like what he's saying or didn't like what he's saying before, they're probably not going to be moved by that. And the normie person who's just coming into it, they may not like it and they may be swayed. But for the people who are in between and they hear the message about the tariffs and they take it that way rather than the negative way about how the media took it, which is, he's saying that after the election it's going to be a bloodbath if he's not in there. At the end of the day, it has the ability to reach people because it goes so viral that may not necessarily love the way that he's approaching it, but they're fully aware of how annoying he is, and they may say, well, I still like the policy. Maybe. Maybe my theory on that is completely wrong. I think when a lot of commenters say everything is baked into the cake, we know who Trump is, we know who Joe Biden is, I do think that is relatively true. So that's why something like not getting out there and showing that he still cares about those people matters more than him politening things up. Then again, like I said earlier, another great factor is the felon thing. That's something that's not baked into the cake right now. I mean, being on the docket for charges is one thing versus being a felon. That's not going to play well with the middle people, the independents. But it is what it is. So let's jump to our last article that comes from Just the News. Ohio congressman introduces bill to repeal 16th Amendment, arguing that the government should not tax income. And hey, as a person who likes their income and a person who thinks that it was actually unconstitutional when this was first posed, I think, hey, maybe this is a good idea. Maybe just a little bit. Maybe this will force our government to stop spending. I'm being delusional. It's not going to force our government to stop spending, especially if it was initially removed, if it was initially repealed. Then the Congress is going to sit there and be like, well, we're just going to have to keep going. Our constituents really want X, Y, and Z, but maybe it inspires a new generation of conservatives, libertarians, original, center-minded liberals that are like, oh, we can actually affect change. And now we have a great excuse to push even more to whittle down some of these programs that we don't actually need to help benefit our society, because now we can say, no, you can't even levy higher income tax anymore. You know what? That talking point about having a higher income tax or a higher, what's the word I'm looking for here? Realized gains tax or unrealized gains tax on billionaires, guess what? Can't have it anymore. So find a different way to get to a place where we are no longer increasing the debt, and that's going to have to be cutting programs. But that's also why it's going to be impossible, because at the end of the day, the data always is, people want to reduce the debt, and then you ask, what should we cut? And then even I have a few ideas. It's not going to solve all of the problems, and a lot of other people have a lot of ideas. Still won't solve all the problems. But let's go into this article. It's a very short one, but I just thought it was it's not necessarily trolly. It's definitely one of those things where it's not going to happen, but he's at least pushing the agenda. Maybe his people in Ohio are like, you know what? I like that you're at least putting this in the zeitgeist. Quote, Congressman Warren Davidson, a Republican of Ohio, introduced legislation to repeal the 16th Amendment, stating that the government should not tax people's income. Originally, the country didn't have an income tax, Davidson said on the Wednesday edition of Just the News, No Noise TV show. So they're plugging their own TV shows there, of course. They passed the 16th Amendment to make it legal to tax people's income. It was originally just going to be for the really, really rich people. Yes, it was. We had one of the highest tax rates on rich people, and in order to shelter their money, they would put them in like C Corps, or they would hold them in the corporation. Like they would say, okay, hey, we're going to give back this dividend, or we're going to give back this bonus, and we'll have it stored as a special type of stock. So then you can redeem it later, or it could be put out as preferred stock to some other people. There were lots of different workarounds that they made. So the people that were really rich were still really rich. They just never actually got it taken in as income. But the point being that the really rich people, when they did have to, cash something out in order to get something done, they were getting taxed excessively high. Quote, Davidson introduced H.R. Resolution 47 last year, but the House has not yet voted on it, and the Ohio's congressman said that he hopes to get the recorded vote on it. So that's what I do agree with. Just see where everybody lines up. That's another thing. You're trolling. You don't think it will actually pass, but see where everybody lines up on it. Get them on the record and see who's for taxing their people more and who's not for taxing their people more. Because guess what? Most people know where most people are going to line up on it, but maybe there are a few stray shots that, can winnow the field down a little bit, or at least define where those moderate Republicans or Democrats are, because they'll probably vote against the rest of the party. It's a really fun one. So, with that out of the way, with all the trolling gone, let's jump to our final story. This one, it comes from the Flipboard storyboard, and the headline reads, "A two-legged fox captivates the internet, plus more incredible animal videos." And it is fascinating how well this fox is able to adapt to its situation. I won't lie. Running around, when I first saw the photo, I was like, is that a kangaroo? I was so baffled. So the headline was already read to you, so let's go through the description. Seemingly healthy, this fox that only has two legs is just going about its business with no problems and captivating the internet. Plus, there's more amazing animals. So if you want to find this photo or video, or you want to actually see more cute videos like this, there will be a link in the description where you can find all of the articles from today, especially this Flipboard page. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, which, yes, I am fully aware, technically might not exist anymore, but let's just hope that it is still operating somewhere. So hold on, let me go through the list again. Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, as well as Podvine. And also down there, you can find the Twitter tirade. For those of you who are just joining in this Friday, I should have posted, because there's a little bit of a time crunch, so I'm kind of altering it this week. I'm going to see if the Twitter tirade, like a little 10-minute podcast, will actually do well on Wednesday. So if you're here on Friday, you made it this far, and you're interested in more content, and you want to kind of see what that's like, what I would post over on Twitter, you can check out Wednesday's podcast or the video that's on the channel right now. And if you like that, you can go to the Twitter tirade or the at your Daily Flip page where I post the Twitter tirades every Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.